How you doing? If you're new to the channel, I'm JT from the Poco Moonshine family, and today we're diving into feeding our kids a carnivore diet and is it safe and good for their growth. We will also discuss what we are feeding our kids now on standard American diets and what impact that has on them and their health and their growth. So if you're curious about what foods we should be feeding our kids of all ages to help them grow to their full potential, you are in the right place. A lot of folks out there think that the carnivore diet is extremely unhealthy, especially for kids. If you take the time to listen to this video, I'll explain what happens when kids are on a carnivore diet. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any carnivore diet videos that are packed with tips, tricks, and all sorts of good stuff that are going to help you on your carnivore journey. Is the carnivore diet safe for our children? Well, I talked to Dr. Chafee about this for quite some time, and we have the answers. One of the things that Dr. Chafee told me was that our bodies need to be in ketosis for our brains to properly develop.
Your body needs to be in ketosis for your brain to properly develop. And when kids are young, then it's a lot easier for them to be in ketosis. But if you get enough sugar, you will force them out of that. And as they get older, it's a bit more difficult. And then when we're adults, we really just have to avoid carbs for days, and then we get back into it. And so, for her brain development, optimal brain development, I would probably limit it just because of the carbohydrates and just trying to keep her in ketosis, because the ketones cross the blood-brain barrier and reconstitute into fatty acids. And those are used as the physical building blocks and material of the brain.
So if our kids are not in ketosis pretty much all of the time, then we limit the amount of available material that's needed to grow their brains and their nervous system. Now, milk, for instance, it's not the worst thing you can give your kid by any means. It's got some good stuff in there, and they should have a little bit of it, but not too much. Giving your child tons of milk throughout the day is just not going to be optimal for their development.
Although milk is very nutritious in a lot of ways, especially raw milk, it is not the same as meat. It's not the same thing as meat. And that's our optimal food. And so I think it would be better to just eat meat.
With these tips from Dr. Chafee, we can prepare our children to grow to their full potential and learn healthy skills for their future. So should we teach our kids how to bake breads and make cakes and things like that? Is that going to be good for them in the long run? Dr. Chafee suggests that we can indeed make those things, breads and cakes and things, but we shouldn't eat them. It may be fun to do though with your kid, frost a cake or whatever. But over time, we can start shifting the child's interest over to carnivore foods and cooking those and show them how much fun cooking a carnivore meal. And we can eat those foods actually and not have guilt that it's packed full of carbs and sugars. Now, Dr. Chafee gave an extreme example.
I want to use an extreme example here, but I don't know. I mean, it's just like if she was saying, it's just like, Mom, I don't want to smoke crack, but I really want to learn how to make a crack pipe. It's like, no, what are you talking about? We're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but it's sort of think about that. It's just like, well, do you need these skills? It's not something that's going to benefit you, in your life and in your health. Having those skills is maybe something down the road that might be fun to do, but is that something that is that a skill that's going to benefit you long term?
Now, getting our kids to adhere to a carnivore diet can be tough, especially if you just found out about carnivore and they were used to having some time where they have sugar and they have foods and they enjoy those treats. It might be kind of tough. So let's talk about cured meats. Some parents say, well, what if I start transitioning them away from sugar and carbs with cured meats like salami, pepperoni, bologna, hot dogs, things like that? Is that okay for them to eat? Dr. Chafee says the closer we get to eating just meat, the better.
So the more meat you eat, the more meat your kids eat, the better. That's where they get the nutrients. That's what they need to eat, right? And they need the fat. Fat is not a calorie source. It is an essential nutrient. It's a compilation of essential nutrients. They're essential fatty acids that you have to have, or you don't develop properly. You're not well, and you can die.
So feeding our kids cured meats is steering them in the right direction, even if they aren't quite there yet eating just pure meat, but they'll get there. Seeing you, the parent, eat the right foods and seeing your results, they will learn. But we should avoid cured meats that have a lot of starches, oats, and sugars added in them.
depending on what's in them, obviously, different sausages, salamis, pepperonis, you look at the packet and see the ingredients. Some are just dreadful. So I just sort of avoid those and try to get ones that have less sort of starches and oats and sugars added to them. There are some that have much less than that. And so you just sort of try to get those, but if they'll eat bacon, and that's fine. It's going to be a lot better than eating, plants or bread or something like that.
Most kids on a standard American diet, 99% of what they're eating is in fact junk foods, and they're not going to develop as well as a kid that's on carnivore diet.
Most natural things will kill you. Plants make about 1 million different chemicals, most of which will kill you. They're all natural.
So natural isn't always the best food to eat. Those natural plants grown by farmers, they're also sprayed with pesticides, which you can run them under the water, but that's not going to get that stuff out of the food. So we don't have to just focus on natural foods. We have to focus on what's natural for us as humans, big and small humans. Now, what's natural to us big humans and the little humans is eating meat. So keep leading by example and pointing out the reasons why meat is better for you to your kids, and they will learn without a lot of force or pressure. With all that being said, some parents still worry though, are there going to be bad things, bad outcomes from putting my child on a carnivore diet? Well, here's some of the facts from Dr. Chafee.
I had never come across anything that showed anything about ketosis or just eating meat or lack of vegetables as being harmful. There are plenty of studies, epidemiological studies, obviously, that show that kids that are raised in vegetarian households have lower bone density, shorter stature, more developmental issues, and poor dentition, things like that. So certainly things that are showing harm in the other direction.
I'm a carnivore. My family's a carnivore. I have a family channel, and I have had other parents make snotty comments on my videos, and I would like to just go through what the doctor thinks about some of these snotty comments. One of the comments I get is that I'm stunting my son's growth, and I'm making him more susceptible to a heart attack later on in life by having him on carnivore. What do you have to say, bud?
Okay. Well, I mean, all the populations that have eaten meat or exclusively meat or near exclusively meat have always been taller than every population alive now. There's a clear disparity pre and post agriculture. They dropped by 5 inches. Brains were 11% smaller for men, 17% smaller for women. And that was pre-agriculture. There were obviously hunter-gatherers. They were already gathering things, and they figured out you could plant them and you wouldn't have to, go so far to gather these things. They were on average 5'9". Then after post-agriculture, on average 5'5". You go back to the mammoth hunters, you go back to the megafauna hunters, they're on average 6'2" to 6'4", right? And then the Native Americans, the Plains Indians, were the tallest population of humans on Earth when they're eating meat and only meat, right? And so that is just completely against the evidence, right? That is someone who simply does not know what the evidence says. As far as heart disease is concerned, more and more and more large studies, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials are all showing that there is no correlation at all between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. And in fact, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology published a massive literature review in 2020 showing that there was no association. In fact, there was an inverse association with stroke. So the more saturated fat people ate, the less strokes they were having. The less saturated fat they ate, the more strokes they were having. So this is actually protective against heart disease, as you would expect if this were a natural diet, which all the hard evidence shows that it was. Heart disease didn't exist before the 20th century. Now it's the number one killer. The first heart attack diagnosed on autopsy, proven on autopsy, was in 1912. That's when we're eating the least amount of meat in 120 years until the next 10 years when we're eating even less. And then it became more prevalent. They didn't believe the guy at first. He published this and went, wow, this is a brand new thing. No one's ever seen anyone die from this before. And he described it. And they said, you're full of it. No one's seen that. That's not a thing. You got that wrong. 10 years later, they started going like, okay, well, maybe there's some merit to this because more people started dying from this. More people started seeing it. More people started publishing on it. 10 years after that, in the 1930s, it's the number one killer in America, right? It went down. We were eating less meat in 1920 and 1930 than we were in 1912 when the first heart attacks showed up. We're eating less meat. We didn't increase the meat, and then heart attacks went up. We reduced meat. and saturated fat and heart disease went up. And that was the low point in 200 years. There was a U-shaped curve from the early 1800s to now. And that was the bottom of the point that we were eating meat. So we were eating the least amount of meat in 200 years, and it spiked up to being the number one killer in America. Makes no damn sense. And there was no heart disease in the 1800s. So there is no correlation. There was no relation. There was no association between increased meat and animal fat and saturated fat intake and heart disease. In fact, there's inverse correlations or inverse relationships. And if you can never show causation from associative studies. You cannot. That's just a definition of statistics. There are no causative studies. There are no studies that can show causation. Only correlation. They're weak at correlation, and they've been shown to be fraudulent since then. There is no correlation. As you can see, for 200 years, has been no correlation between heart disease rates and meat consumption. None. And then you go back further than that. You go back thousands of years, meat consumption is going up and down and up and down and up and down. Heart disease didn't exist, right? And so there's no correlation. You can't prove causation from correlation, but if you show that there's no correlation, then that proves there's no causation. You have to have correlation to have causation, to have a cause and effect relationship. And there just isn't any, So the fact that people are still clinging on to this is, I guess it's understandable. We've been drilling this into our heads for the last 50 years, but it is strictly against the evidence.
If you'd like to see and hear from Dr. Chafee himself about the topics we addressed in this video, you can click on this video right here. Let's go!